to another of the UK Tours Online, another of our free chats. This one's in celebration of Halloween coming up in 3 days. So we've got some tales for you this evening from London and the rest of the country, the ghostly, the supernatural, the mysterious. We've got apparitions, poltergeists, ghostly creatures, witches, executions, all manner of fun for you tonight. So I hope where you are, it is suitably dark outside, that there is a loud ticking clock, perhaps a dog howling somewhere in the mists and fog outside. The five of us are each going to share some of our ghost stories this evening, and some of our favorites, some of which may even be true. Who knows? We've got no idea what's true and what's not on all of this. If you've got any favorite ghost stories, or if you've got any tales that you've heard, or rumors of tales, just put them into the chat as we go along, and we'll come to some of those at the end of the session. And if you've got any questions about anything that we're talking about as we go along, other than the question, is this true or not, to which the answer is, of course, they're all true, do put those into the chat as well, and we shall pick those up at the end. Each of the five of us have got things to talk about, and I'm going to kick off with some ghost stories, and I'm just going to try and bring those up here, and tell you. I could tell you about the ghost I saw in my university college 40 years ago, who glided through the door one night, or I could tell you about the locked room in the Churchill War Rooms, where the radio was playing one morning, a locked room that no one had access to. But instead, I'm going to start off with the Tower of London. Tower of London, probably the most haunted building in England, if not the world, these days. There's a tale of a beefeater who, on duty one night, saw the light in the chapel. So he climbs up onto the monument outside, peeks in through the window, and sees this ghostly procession, lords and ladies led by Anne Boleyn. Some stories say holding her head, some say headless, processing down the aisle of St. Peter ad Vincula. Or there is the guard in the 1700s who, turning a corner, sees a great bear appear in front of him. He's a brave guard. He charges the bear with his bayonet, but the bear disappears. The bayonet sticks in the door. 2 days later, the guard is dead. Or happened quite recently, in the 1980s, a beefeater going into what's called the Bywood Tower, one of the big towers that is the entrance to the Tower of London complex. He goes up a flight of stairs, goes into a room, and he notices a fire burning in the corner, and two beefeaters chatting either side of the roaring fire. And there's a couple of things wrong with this. One is there's never a fire in that room. The fireplace doesn't work. And the other is that the two beefeaters are wearing out-of-date uniforms. And as he comes through the door, one of the people by the fire turns to him, looks him in the eyes, smiles, and then he, his companion, and the roaring fire all disappear into nothing. Or there is a story close to me here, Old Battersea House, which is a 17th century house about a mile away from here. And a lady is visiting one day, and she says to the owner, "Do you have a guest here? A guest who might be going to some sort of fancy dress party?" And he said, "No, I mean, why do you ask?" And he said, "Well, as I was waiting for you just now, I looked up, and on the landing up there was a gentleman in a large plumed hat with a very bright coat and long riding boots. And at his side, he had a sword. And he came down the stairs, and every time he came down a stair, his sword would hit it. Tap, tap, tap all the way down. And he didn't seem to notice me. He brushed straight past me without any acknowledgement, went through the double doors and then disappeared. But the story I'm going to tell is also close to me here, about half a mile away from me here. There is a street called Wycliffe Road. And back in the 1950s, 1956, when we're setting this story, it was a row of Victorian terraced houses, very much like the row of Victorian terraced houses that I live in. And at number 63, one morning, 15-year-old Shirley Hitchings, who lives there with her family, finds a very ornate silver key on her pillow. She puts it on the mantelpiece to show her father when he comes back from work. But when he comes back that evening, they can't find it anywhere. It appears again the next morning on the pillow. Then noises start. That night, there is a banging from all around the house. It seems to come from every single wall. It's coming from the floors. It's coming from the ceilings. It's so loud that the neighbors come round and complain about it. And there seems to be no source for this noise at all. And this continues night after night for the next 2 weeks. They're all absolutely shattered, their nerves on edge. And then it gets worse. There's then a scratching. The scratching seems to come from the walls. It seems to be coming from the floors. It's coming from the furniture, the bed that Shirley sleeps in. It's coming from the bed head. It's as if something is on the inside, scratching, trying to come out. Then things start to move. A clock on the mantelpiece glides around the living room. Pots and pans are thrown from the kitchen and crash against the wall in the living room. A pair of slippers is seen to walk across the floor, all on its own. There are fires that break out. Messages appear on the walls. A piece of paper in a room is turned over and there is a scrawl on it saying, "Shirley, I come." The worst one is that witnesses testify to seeing Shirley levitating off her bed as if she's being held up by some unseen force. Shirley is still alive. She's 80. She swears that all of this happened. She swears that all of this is true, that every event recorded at the time and in the books that she later wrote happened. And if you want to find out more about it, there is an excellent podcast series on BBC Sounds called The Battersea Poltergeist. And I urge you to download of that and listen to the full tales and make your mind up as to how true or not that might be. The thing that gets me, though, about the Battersea Poltergeist is that they had a name for it. They called it Donald. And I don't know why. But the Battersea Poltergeist is also it's spread from being this podcast. It is now also a theatrical production, and by a great crashing of gears, that leads me to a link to the next few tales that are going to come, and those, of course, are going to come from our resident West End actor Tim, who is going to tell you all about the ghosts of theatres in London's West End and beyond. And here he is, the man in black himself, to tell us the tale.
Hello there, Don. Can you hear me, everybody? Wave at me, for goodness sake. Thank you. I've got all the poltergeists going with me tonight. I disappeared off the screen. Well, as Don said, many years ago, before I was a Blue Badge Guide, I was an actor, still am, of course. And we're used to living in very suspicious circumstances and working in old, cold, damp places. One of the most famous of those old, cold, damp, big buildings is probably the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane, third oldest theatre on the site. And it's haunted by the man in grey. It's a signal of good luck. And here is the man in grey. He appears for musicals in rehearsals, particularly who's there at South Pacific, Oklahoma, Carousel, and The King and I. It's an omen of a good show. Dressed here, 18th century style, powdered hair, tricorn hat, sort of poltergeist poldark, if you like. But in 1848, when they did some restoration work on the theatre, they pulled down a wall and found a skeleton within with a knife implanted in his chest. As that wasn't enough, there are actually 3 other scary theatres on the Strand. We've got the ghost of William Trevis, who was stabbed at the stage door of the Adelphi in 1897. Now, you thought all us actors were lovies. Well, William Trevis was clearly not one of those. The day before he was murdered, his understudy had some terrible dreams. Now, I've been an understudy, so I know what understudy dreams are all about. The understudy has witnessed Terrace lying in a pool of blood coming from a gaping wound in his chest. William Terrace also haunts the Lyceum Theatre, slightly further down the road. And that's not too surprising, because, of course, Bram Stoker was the doorkeeper at the Lyceum, the chap who wrote Dracula. And if you employ people like that, you're bound to get ghosts. Round the corner at the Vaudeville Theatre, we have a rather classy ghost. It's the ghost of Voltaire, the 17th century French writer, a sort of Gallic ghost, if you like, and his spirit has been seen on several occasions. But every theatre in the West End has a ghost light. And a ghost light is that light they put on stage when the theatre is dark, when there isn't a performance there. Some people say it's so the ghosts can entertain themselves while the people are not around. Other people say it's to stop people falling off the front of the stage and breaking their leg when they fall into the orchestra pit. Other people say it's a throwback to when theatres were gas lit and they had to relieve the gas pressure somehow. So it's something like that. Round at the Palace Theatre, where of course Harry Potter is currently playing, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, like most West End theatres, the seats flip up. But in the Gods and the cheapest seats right at the top, there are 2 seats which don't flip back up. They've had the bottoms bolted down, and that's so the ghosts can watch the show. I've only got one thing to say about that, and that's Expelliarmus. It's not all London theatre ghosts, though. In Bath, we have the famous tortoise butterfly ghost. In the 1940s, there was a pantomime put on, and the director died during rehearsals. He was going to put on a tortoise-shell butterfly ballet. His son took over the production and cut the ballet, and the show was starting to fall apart until the son realized, I must put the butterfly ballet back in. He did, and it became a great success. And to that point onwards, if a butterfly appears on stage or backstage at the Theatre Royal Bath, it's going to be a cracking show. A butterfly appeared on stage with Leslie Crowther in the 70s, and in the 80s, Honor Blackman had a butterfly alight on her shoulder. Up in the King's Theatre, Edinburgh, there's a ghoulie stagehand who wanders about aimlessly backstage. Now, I've seen many, aimless people wandering about backstage, but I've never actually seen a ghost in the 40 years I've been in this business. At the Tron, Glasgow, there's a phantom seat tipper who flips seats up when you're least expecting it. I couldn't really walk away from this whole thing without mentioning Lady Macbeth and the Scottish play. Well, it's said that the Scottish play has lines from the Black Mass in it. James I wanted these kind of things put in, and so Shakespeare obliged. But to this day, we actors still use the expression, will the ghost walk? Will the ghost walk tonight? Is the ghost going to walk this week? And it means, will we get paid? Because when theatre companies are in dire straits, they put on the Scottish play because they know it's going to bring in punters, because there's blood and guts and gore and ghosts and goodness knows what else. So that's the Scottish play for you. Now, the Scottish play, of course, opens up with the 3 witches, Hubble Bubble, Toil and Trouble, and Rachel is going to give you some more ghostly information.
Follow that if you can. Yeah, hello folks, good evening. You didn't need to go to the theatre in the 16th and 17th centuries to see witches. Witch trials, witch hunts were a bit of an obsession with the general public. And this pamphlet that you're looking at here is an example of the type of literature that was produced during the 16th and 17th centuries as a result of this obsession. Now, this pamphlet is a lovely example of this kind of literature. It's produced, as you can see, by a chap called Matthew Hopkins for the benefit of the whole kingdom. I mean, witches were something that everyone needed to be on their guard about. And can you see the subtitle there as well? Thou shalt not suffer to let a witch live. Yes, it was big business. And Matthew Hopkins was a real person. He was genuinely appointed witch finder general, as the left-hand side of this pamphlet so declares. But it's likely that Hopkins abused his position. It's likely that in his desire to seek out witches, he would almost certainly use torture to extract confessions from suspected witches and thus increase his tally of witch convictions. But if we move on, we have, sorry, a rather gruesome image, but hey, it is Halloween. Now, interestingly, women who were found guilty of witchcraft were not always sentenced to death. And this was particularly true in the 16th century. For any sort of minor offences, certainly for your first offence, as long as it didn't involve the death of another person, you were likely to have another punishment meted out. However, capital punishment was a spectacle that was hugely popular with the general public. And if the general public got to see a witch, or witches plural, hanging into the bargain, then it was even more of a must-attend event, so to speak. Now, Tim mentioned James I, and James I had an avid interest in witchcraft and witch hunts and all things to do with witches. In fact, James I published a book that he had written himself, which apparently documented the kind of methodology that witches would use in their doings and spells and things. And in 1604, James I introduced a new Witchcraft Act, an act of Parliament that changed the law to say that women who were convicted of being a witch could be hanged immediately. It didn't matter if it was their first offence or whether it was their 51st, and it certainly didn't matter whether anyone had died or not as a result of their actions. They would be sentenced to death. Hanging became mandatory. Essentially, James I was tapping into people's bloodlusts, and he was also sparking a renewed interest in witch hunts, which by 1604 had slightly died out of popularity. And there are two witches that I'm going to talk about in particular, or two women who were accused of being a witch as a result of this new act that was passed. Joan Peterson became known as the Witch of Wapping. Wapping is in the East End of London. And Joan Peterson was almost certainly a woman who was just simply trying to help the sick and the poor, as many people did in the East End, where illness and sickness were rife in that part of the capital. But some people felt there was more to Joan Peterson's action than simply medicine at work, particularly those who, of course, she wasn't able to cure. And she eventually was convicted of being a witch, and her trial took place at the Old Bailey. And during that trial, many witnesses came forward to present evidence against Joan Peterson. One of those witnesses said that he knew that the devil had come to visit Joan Peterson, but very cunningly disguised in various different guises. He said that first, the devil had visited her as a dog. And secondly, the devil had visited her as a squirrel, because goodness me, we've all met those really evil, fearsome squirrels, haven't we? Yeah, that was bound to be true. But Joan Peterson, I mean, the nail in her coffin, so to speak, was that she owned a black cat. So, you know, who needed more proof than that? And she was convicted, she was found guilty, and she was hanged at Tyburn in 1652. Now, it seems that Joan was a rather unfortunate name to give a child at this time, because another woman called Joan was also accused of being a witch, and she was called Joan Kent. And her case revolved around the fact that she wanted to buy 2 pigs from one of the traders in Spitalfields Market. But she didn't have the cash available. She wanted to buy those pigs on credit. And when Mr. Chambler, the market trader in question, refused to give Joan Kent credit for the pigs, try saying that after a glass or 2, he said, he told the court that what happened was, firstly, his pigs became very, very sick. They developed swellings all over their bodies. And then it seems that his 5-year-old daughter also developed the same illness as the pigs. She developed swellings. And both the pigs and his daughter sadly died of the illness. And he blamed all of this solely on Joan Kent. And of course, once one person starts making accusations like that, other people come out of the woodwork. There was a stagecoach owner, and he swore to the court that when he had refused Joan Kent passage on his coach, she'd overturned it and she'd caused injury to his horses. And then a third witness came forward, and goodness only knows how they knew this, but they swore blind that Joan Kent had a teat on her back. Who knows if that was true? However, unlike Joan Peterson, Joan Kent must have been one smooth talking lady, because she managed to convince the judge that she was an honest, good, God-fearing, church-going woman who was doing absolutely nothing wrong, and the judge overturned her conviction. So Joan Kent was allowed to go free. But there you go, the 2 witches of the East End of London, both called Joan. And before you went to go and see a trial, because if you couldn't get a conviction, you might as well go and see a good old trial of a witch, you might want to have stopped off in a pub along the way. And Emma is going to now tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much. I hope everybody can hear me. So the trial might have taken place in the Old Bailey. I think we're going to hear a bit more about that later. But my pub is in Fleet Street in the City of London. And Fleet Street is named after a long buried river. It was the area for printers, writers, publishers and newspapers for 500 years until the 1980s. In fact, the first printing press nearby was set up in the churchyard of St. Bride's Church in the late 1400s by a Dutchman called Wynkyn de Worde. I just can never resist sharing that name. The first daily newspaper was founded by a woman, Elizabeth Mallet, in the early 1700s. And by the mid-1700s, the place was bustling with literary types and journalists, the hacks of Grub Street, if you like, who were not averse to drinking together in the many pubs and coffee houses that lined Fleet Street and all the streets around this area. And Ye Old Cock, of which, thank you, Leo, there are 2 photographs on your screen. The Old Cock was one of these very pubs. Now, you'll notice if you look at the right-hand slide, what a very, very, very narrow entrance it has. And it's a bit like a TARDIS. When you go inside, it opens out into quite a big space with a long bar and cozy booths all down one side. And if you were to go right out the back door of the pub, you would almost walk into the temple churchyard. A writers' club was formed in this pub, and members included people like Samuel Johnson, who wrote the first dictionary of the English language and came out with some great lines like, if a person is tired of London, he's tired of life. Another member and pub regular, however, was his great friend, Oliver Goldsmith, who between writing popular plays such as She Stoops to Conquer and the novel The Vicar of Wakefield, spent much of his time eating and drinking in this pub together with his friends. I think that might have contributed to his early death in 1774 at the age of 52. He was well known and famous and buried in the Temple churchyard. You can see his grave there today. But it seems that Oliver Goldsmith's grave was not a quiet one, because at least part of him, most usually his head, would frequently be seen floating around the pub, in particular the bar area. He so terrified a new barmaid one morning with his ghostly appearance that she was speechless for several days. All she could do when asked what she had seen was point to a picture, next slide please, Leo, of the sometime pub regular, yes, Oliver Goldsmith, for it was his head. And if you look at this picture on the screen, if you can see, there's a rather smart looking gentleman on the far right-hand side, because this is his literary club depicted in a blue coat, and this is Oliver Goldsmith himself. He kept turning up, apparently, and there have been many sightings of this particular head, and I've kept an eye open ever since I was a young barrister in the area in the 1980s. I was even there the other day with some clients hoping for a sighting, but I have to say, so far, no luck. My next story, next slide please, Leo, was equally weird and happened in Chelsea, near where I live. I took these photos the other day of 6 Pond Place. This was in the area of a street called Pond Terrace, which is no longer there, where a whole family suffered a terrible fright due to the ghost that decided to pay them a visit in 1844. At this time in London, spiritualism was all the rage. Newspapers couldn't get enough of ghostly goings on. Now, this was no exception. What happened was this. A respectable but large and poor family lived in a house just like this one in the photograph on the right. The mother had died and the children were supported by their father. These were the days when children were often left home alone. There was no choice. Mr. Ward went to work one morning, and his young daughter, Emma, went upstairs to the room she shared with her many brothers. They were all downstairs when they heard a blood-curdling scream and a loud thud followed by a bang. One of them rushed upstairs to find his sister in a dead faint at the top of the stairs with a terrified expression on her face. There was a thumping behind the closed door. So being a brave lad, he put his hand out to the door handle to open it, but it flew open. And what greeted him was an apparition so ghastly that he was rooted to the spot in terror and started babbling. One by one, the other brothers came upstairs and suffered the same. Meanwhile, the disturbance had attracted the attention of the neighborhood, and people started to crowd into the house. Every person who went upstairs, where there was still wailing and banging of doors, suffered the same. Eventually, a large crowd or flash mob had gathered outside in the narrow street. Firemen came. They failed to dislodge the spirit. Policemen were summoned. Neither could they get rid of it. Now, finally, a bright spark eventually decided to send for the vicar from the nearby, thank you, Leo, you've got it, St. Luke's Church. Now, this is a photograph of how the church looks today. And just as an aside, it was actually the one where Charles Dickens married his his only wife, in fact, Catherine Hogarth. Anyway, the vicar arrived, knelt on the stairs at a safe distance, I have to say, from the terrible door, and said prayers for several hours. Eventually, things began to calm down. And by the time Mr. Ward returned from work, all was quiet, but his children were utterly unable to speak. They eventually recovered, but were never able to quite describe what they'd seen. And the newspapers were full of the story for weeks. This mystery was never solved. So who was this restless spirit? I have no idea. But next slide, please, Leo. I speculate that it might have had something to do with the name of the street, Pond Terrace. Houses had actually been built over a former farm pond. As London was expanding into the surrounding countryside and villages like Chelsea in the early 1800s. So perhaps this was the ghost of a drowned man who took exception to his watery grave being covered over with housing. We will never know. The whole area nearby was built over again with social housing in the late 1800s, and that's what it looks like now on the right. And I've always wondered why the wealthy never wanted to build their fine houses there. Perhaps they knew something. So with that, I'm going to hand you back to Leo, and we're going to take a journey back in time and back to the City of London.
Thank you so much, Emma. Don or Rachel, would you be kind enough to spotlight me? Because I can't spotlight myself. I'm in charge of tech again this evening, folks. Hello. Welcome to my, I'm in my coven for you all this evening, not my living room. I have my pumpkin at the ready. My witch's hat is in the background. No black book spells from me to you all this evening. I'll keep those. They're all well and truly under my hat. I am going to take you back into the city for my couple of spooky tales and stories tonight. I love the City of London, and any of you who have done lots of tours with us, have seen any of the city, the archaeology tours that I do, you'll know that I absolutely love the city and everything within it. And when you've got 2,000 years of history to choose from, you're probably going to come across a few spooky stories as you go. And there are loads that I could have chosen to talk to you about, but I'm just going to go tonight for two. I'm limiting myself to just my favorite two. And this beautiful lady, who you can see on your screens at the moment, this is Queen Isabella, or Isabella of France, as she was from Paris. She was born in Paris in 1295. And in her early teens, she was promised to a gentleman who would go on to become King Edward II. And here he is, looking suitably regal and fabulous. Look at that beard. I'm always very impressed. Whenever you see images of Edward II, he is always very well groomed for a 13th, early 14th century individual. And that may have something to do with the rumours about his preferences when it came to choosing partners. There were all sorts of rumours at court that he possibly preferred the company of gentlemen to the company of ladies. And his queen was none too impressed by this. Early 1300s, as I'm sure you can imagine, not talked about as freely and widely as we would be able to talk about it today. But Isabella took matters, so they say, into her own hands. She and her lover, Roger Mortimer, if you believe the version of the story, Edward II was deposed. That bit is true. That definitely happened. They replaced him with his 14-year-old son, Edward III, and Edward II was imprisoned, and rather unpleasant end. He died. Some versions of the story say murdered. Some versions of the story even go so far as to say that Isabella, to get her ultimate revenge on him spurning her in the bedroom, that his death was caused by a red hot poker somewhere rather painful. And I will leave you to imagine where that might have been. However, whether this was the ultimate revenge at the end, or whether this is all a big elaborate story and it wasn't true, when she died, She was buried at this rather lovely venue. Let me show you what it looks like today. This is Greyfriars Churchyard. Now today it is, you can see on the screens there, it's a ruin. It's just behind St. Paul's Cathedral. And the reason it's a ruin, it was destroyed almost entirely by the bombs of the Blitz, 1940 to 1941. It was a Christopher Wren rebuild on a site that had previously been destroyed by the Great Fire of London in 1666. So already full of history. Before the Wren Church that you can see on your screens, it was a medieval monastery, looked after by the Greyfriars, monks of the Franciscan order. And so, as I'm sure you can expect, a site like this, with about 700, nearly 800 years of history to its name, it has not just one, but possibly 5 ghosts. And Queen Isabella is one of them. Why? Because she was buried in the grounds of Christchurch Greyfriars. She died in 1358. And when she was buried with a small silver casket that contained, of all strange things to be buried with, the heart of her former husband, Edward II. How does she appear, this mysterious ghost? Well, if I tell you that her nickname, because of the way that Edward III was brought to the throne, because of the way that Edward II might possibly have died, she earned the rather ferocious nickname, the She-Wolf of France. And I'm sorry to say that I couldn't find you a suitable scary image, but she appears apparently sometimes in the form of a grey wolf slinking around the grounds, sometimes in the form of a cowled grey lady. How do we know it's Isabella? Because she appears creeping up on you from behind the undergrowth with the still beating heart of Edward in her hand. Not one that I would want to bump into on a dark night. One of the other ghosts that haunts Greyfriars is apparently a very benign, one of those lovely Franciscan monks. Brown cowl, brown cowl, teeth in, grey cowl for the Greyfriars, and he's very pleasant. He apparently appears in the early hours of the morning, in the dawn, and as the sun comes up, he disappears. And he's usually admiring the flowers, apparently. I'd far rather bump into him than into Isabella, She-Wolf of France, complete with dripping bloody heart. But there you are. The Grey Lady of Greyfriars Churchyard is my number one. My second one this evening for our Halloween special, equally grotesque, equally horrible. What you can see on your screens is a cartoon image of the Black Dog of Newgate. What on earth is the story of the Black Dog of Newgate? Well, Emma mentioned the site that the Black Dog of Newgate haunts a little moment ago. The Black Dog of Newgate, this is what Newgate used to look like, Newgate Prison. Newgate Prison today is the site of the Old Bailey, our central criminal court, where Emma mentioned that some of those trials would have taken place. The present Old Bailey has been on this site since 1907. That's what it looks like today. Very different. But the prison that stood before that and stood there for several centuries was pretty renowned for its awful conditions, being overcrowded, treating its inmates with zero respect, beatings, terrible treatment, starvation, also a site of lots and lots of public executions. And one of the former prisoners, we're going all the way back to 1596 for this story of the origin story of the Black Dog of Newgate. It's said that in 1596, a prisoner was brought into Newgate Prison on accusation of sorcery. Very appropriate for Rachel's former chat. Very, at the end of the 1500s, this sudden obsession with witchcraft and witch trials. So 1596, he's accused of sorcery. Whilst awaiting his judgment, he is set upon by his fellow cellmates, all very superstitious. He is killed by the other inmates. And apparently, because food was so scarce in Newgate prison, some bits of him were even eaten by the inmates of the prison. I don't know if that bit's true. But what happened next was every night, every single night consecutively for the next several weeks, months, years, and now even centuries, the spirit of that accused sorcerer, a black dog, began to appear in and around the streets around Newgate, and very specifically along a little passageway that runs to the back, just across the street from where the Old Bailey stands today. Today, it has the rather pleasant name, very near St. Paul's Cathedral. It's called Amen or Amen Court. In the 16th century, it was called, slightly less pleasant, Dead Man's Walk, because it was the passageway along which prisoners would have walked before their public execution in the yard. And the Black Dog of Newgate apparently haunts Dead Man's Walk, Amen Court. It appears sometimes as a dog, sometimes it has red eyes. Some stories talk about it slithering along the top of the wall. Some stories refer to it being there's a foul smell that accompanies a black shadow that when you turn, it disappears. Sometimes there's foul noises, there's groans and creaks of chains and rattles of chains. Whichever version of the story you believe, I certainly will not go wandering down Amen Court on my own anytime after dark, just in case I spot a couple of red eyes in the corner, peeking out from a shadowy corner of the walkway. So those are my two creepy stories from the city. What we're going to do, we're not quite done with you all just yet. I'm going to come out of the share. That's our individual bits of our presentations done. We promised that we would come back, as we always do. You know, we all like to have a bit of chat at the end. And so we thought the chat's been very quiet. Do feel free to share some of your own stories. Don, let me hand back. Where are you?
I don't know. I seem to have disappeared. I'm here somewhere in the ether. I'm
Poltergeist.
Add myself to the spotlight.
I'm going to
but
there we are.
There we go. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm still thinking of the still beating heart of Edward II. As,
We've had a message from Carolyn. Hi, Carolyn, saying that she was a docent for 2 years on Alcatraz.
Wow.
Now that is what an amazing job, Carolyn. And that also is a very haunted place. Well, would you like to share a story with us?
Has anybody had any creepy encounters?
Yes, if anyone's had any creepy encounters or you've got any questions, do put them into the chat. Just while you're having a thought, I'm going to share the screen and just show you, hopefully just show you what we've got coming up, and hopefully you can see those. We've got quite a full program for November. There's a few more to be added, but next week Tim's going to talk about London's amazing automobiles. Leo is a glutton for punishment and is doing 2 talks on one evening on the 7th of November. Her sort of 2-part archaeology of London. So one at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then time for you all to have a cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit, and then tune in again for part 2, which looks at the discoveries that have been made on this huge infrastructure project that should have opened 2 years ago and has been going on for a decade. Crossrail that's going across the city. Tim is at Greenwich on the 10th of November. Murdered in there as well, so presumably ghosts also haunting bits of Greenwich.
Yes, definitely.
I'm talking about, God, it is getting a bit somber, isn't it? World War I memorials on Armistice Day on the 11th of November, and Americans in London on the 18th. And Rachel will tell you even more about executions and witches and so forth.
All of that.
Towards the end of the month, yes, in her little overview of London's East End. And I will also, God, I'm doing a lot at the end of this month. I'll have to cut some of those out. Oxford University, some of the more light-hearted traditions of the university, which we'll do at the end of the month. And I know Leo's working on one on historic houses, and also I think on one on Covent Garden, and Emma's got a few things bubbling away as well. So there is going to be more coming up in the next few weeks. So just go to UK Tours online and follow the links to forthcoming tours. Martin's got a question for Emma. Doesn't the George on Fleet Street also have a ghost? The barman there told me he'd seen a man in cavalier type clothes while he was in the cellar.
No, Martin, I haven't heard that one before, but quite possibly. There was certainly, talking of cellars and Fleet Street, right opposite the George pub is the Royal Courts of Justice. And when that was opened in 1882, the area that had been there before had been a slum. And a lot of people were living there, and they were cleared out to build this court building. And after the new courts were opened, sometime later, a man, an actual live man, so this isn't really a ghost story, was found living in one of the basement rooms. This building has over 1,000 rooms, and somebody had managed to tuck themselves away in a basement. It also has a tunnel from the cells out into the river and potentially to freedom, if you knew about it.
1,000 rooms. It makes you wonder whether some of those are haunted and no one's noticed.
No.
You know, that must be really depressing for a ghost. You know, there you are haunting away, and no one, no one knows you're there at all.
We have another question, Don.
Yeah.
From, not a question, a happy to share moment from Linda. Very short.
Yes, yep.
Can we unmute Linda?
Oh yes, yeah, just press the space bar, Linda, and you will and you will be unmuted.
You need to unmute.
No, it
No?
doesn't work.
And just
go
maybe
on.
I can find her here. Hang on, bum. Excuse
I'm
me,
there now.
Linda. Let me.
Yes.
Yeah,
we can
there
hear
she
me.
is. Yeah.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
This is a very short piece. It's from the end of a ghost story, and it's local to Somerset, about a little village called Cummich on the River Parrett. Today, the eastern approach to the River Parrett, opposite Cummich, is just a lonely track, and the old White House Inn just a ruin along it. It is easier to imagine the days of the ferry in the village, setting off the Cummich side, where passengers would wait for the ferry in the Blue Anchor Inn or ring the bell to summon the ferryman from the other side. Less easy to imagine, unless you were out on the riverbank alone on a wild night and with darkness approaching, is the reputed ghostly reenactment of that evening in the 18th century, when the horses pulled a coach across the Cummich Passage, were startled and bolted, taking the vehicle and its innocent passengers to a watery oblivion.
Ooh, spooky.
Oh.
There's all sorts of really good ones. So where I grew up, there is a horrible story about a little country lane, and it has a really sharp bend in the lane. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, lots of farms and, tiny single track roads. And there is a story very similar that if you drive a lot, that there was a death on the lane, and that if you are driving too fast down the lane, you may well see suddenly there will be a white shape in the middle of the road. And if you see that white shape, then that's what causes loads of accidents along that road. Nothing to do with anybody's terrible driving down dark country lanes late at night. It's because the ghost makes you crash obviously.
Obviously.
Yeah, but no, that's always, I still, driving down, I have, you know us all very well by now, a very vivid imagination. I didn't like driving down that road. It was one of those kind of, oh, please don't let there be any white shadows.
Carolyn asking how long we'll be continuing the virtual tours. Well, as long as we still get an audience, I think is basically it. We've got a November program together. We'll continue going until Christmas at least, and then slot some in for the new year. It's a bit of a sort of odd time, I think, for anyone who does events, because I do this through the London Society. We're finding that the in-person events aren't quite getting the numbers of people there. People are still reluctant, or some people are still reluctant to come out. And the online event, after 18 months of Zoom, I think quite a lot of people are absolutely fed up of doing online things. But we will keep plugging away. What we have noticed is that people are booking much more at last minute these days as well. So you will probably get more emails from us saying, don't forget tomorrow, because now that things are opening up again, people have got other things in their schedule, and therefore booking a couple of weeks in advance for a tour is slightly more difficult online. What we're also doing is that we're recording everything, if we remember to click the right button, and then sending everyone who's registered that link, and you can watch it on catch up for the next 3 days after that, so that if there is something we're doing and it looks like something interesting but you've got something else on, if you buy a ticket, you will get a link the next morning saying, here it is, and you'll be able to watch it in your own time on your own device for the next sort of 3 days after that. So yeah, we'll keep plugging away, because we enjoy doing them. We don't have to leave the house. We've got cups of tea here, all of that sort of thing. So it's we're all having fun doing them still.
And as long as, the main thing is, as long as all you wonderful, loyal, fantastic people who've kept us going for the last 2 years nearly still want us to, then we want to. I think that's
very much true. We are all sort of starting to go out and about a bit as well as things open up. So we haven't really put many
maybe you are.
Careful.
Well,
I think I've done one tour online, maybe two, in real life, maybe two. We'll be putting more up probably, but if there are any things that you're interested in, just drop us a line, and we can see what we can do. Or
I was just about to say, if there are topics out there that you would like covered, either virtually or in person, do let us know. We're really interested in putting on things that you want to hear about. So yeah,
if
get in
you
touch.
Zoom us, we will talk.
Is that going to be our motto?
Very good point in the chat, that as it's sort of evenings drawing in and it's a bit colder and a bit more miserable outside, maybe people will be a bit more inclined. I'm certainly far more inclined to spend an evening on the sofa. Being in a pub beer garden in deepest, darkest November isn't quite as nice.
No, it's not as
Well,
much fun, is it?
I've actually just seen Martin has said Fleet Street would be good. So I'm going to make an undertaking to you all here and now that I will do it as a compliment to my legal tour, which is the Strand, which I'll put on again. And I'll do a sort of Fleet Street journalists, writers, pubs, and I'll do that as an addition perhaps to that.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and someone coming up with food-related famous London restaurants and pubs, quintessential dishes.
Yes.
Ooh.
That's a good one.
That's the next. Hampstead and Heath. Those of you interested in my historic houses tour, one of the properties I'm talking about is Kenwood. So that's sort of a little nod to Hampstead. It's not a full Hampstead, but I will include Kenwood. So a little sprinkle of Hampstead in that one.
So that's really useful suggestions already. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
great stuff. Great stuff indeed.
You know where we are if you have any more ideas.
Any more questions or observations or ghost stories or hauntings.
Did you see the comment from Gloria? It was a bit. Oh, so Leo replied to her. I haven't
think
read the
Leo
Harkness
replied,
books.
yeah.
Right. Okay.
I did want to mention Herman the German, who haunts the Bovington Tank Museum down in Dorset. He's a particularly benign ghost. He comes out on special occasions.
Any excuse to get a vehicle reference in, Tim.
Do join Tim for his automobile talk next week.
Yes. And have you got any haunted cars in your automobile?
I'm sure I
I
can come up with something.
Next Wednesday, the 3rd of November, isn't it, Tim?
Oh, dear.
Talk about Carrie or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh no, was that no, that wasn't the haunted car.
Herbie.
Was that the
Wasn't
haunted
it Herbie?
one?
The Plymouth Fury.
Yeah.
Oh goodness me!
I'm sure we'll be able to
it'll come to me.
put one together by then. Yeah. Right then. Any more before Rachel needs to go off for her supper? I need to have. I can
Very true.
smell food.
Why am
cooking
I the only one
as well.
eating? But yes.
I'm going to go and stir my cauldron. And
Yes, yes. Tim's got to go back to his coffin, and I'm going to luxuriate in my magnificent oak panel room here, and Emma is going to sort of fade away.
I'm going to have to do that before I catch fire.
Yes. Well, I'm rather hoping this has recorded on our Facebook page, because I forgot to click the button to say record on when we started doing this, but it does say live on Facebook, so I'm hoping it is being recorded on Facebook, so that you can come again. And yes, so it's lovely to see you all. Do you have a happy Halloween? I hate the whole Halloween thing. Give me Guy Fawkes night and fireworks any day of the year. But if you can have a happy Halloween, eat lots of chocolate, pumpkins, whatever, and hopefully we will see you all next month.
Yeah.
Oh my God! And there's some strange creatures appearing in the videos as we zoom out. Lots of stuff happening in November. So hopefully we'll see some of you again then, but that's it for a spooky Halloween, and we shall see you all shortly.
Magnificent.
Bye.
Thank you, bye.